The homeless crisis didn't erupt overnight. It grew like a crack in concrete, small at first, then widening, then impossible to ignore. What started as scattered tents under freeways has become entire neighborhoods of desperation, cities reshaped by an emergency they can no longer afford to manage or contain. Shelters overflow, motels convert into triage centers, police departments quietly admit they've lost control, and mayors hold emergency meetings that sound less like governance and more like confessions. America isn't witnessing a spike in homelessness, it is witnessing a rupture, a moment when the cost of living, mental health collapse, addiction, inflation, and a broken housing system collide into something explosive. Some cities are already past the brink, not collapsing all at once, but buckling, street by street, block by block, until the line between crisis and normal life disappears. These are the 4 cities collapsing first. 1. Los Angeles, the city that ran out of space to hide its crisis. Los Angeles didn't break suddenly, it frayed, quietly, steadily, until the seams finally split and the city could no longer pretend the crisis was temporary. For decades, LA tried to balance 2 identities, the polished postcard image of palm trees and sunsets, and the reality unfolding in the shadows beneath its freeways. But a city can only hide so much, and Los Angeles has run out of places to tuck the suffering away. Drive through it now and you feel the collapse before you see it. The tents aren't clustered anymore. They stretch under every overpass, down every side street, into parks, near schools, behind strip malls, lining the edges of billion-dollar developments like a living contradiction the city refuses to acknowledge but can't escape. Los Angeles is no longer experiencing homelessness. It is becoming defined by it. The housing market was the first domino. A simple apartment, nothing fancy, nothing modern, now costs what a mortgage did 20 years ago. Wages never caught up, inflation widened the gap, and the eviction wave that followed the pandemic wasn't a ripple, it was a tsunami. Families who scraped by for years finally slipped one late payment at a time until the only affordable roof was canvas. Then the services collapsed under the weight, shelters overflowed, outreach teams burned out, mental health programs stalled in bureaucracy, and the city's own estimates became meaningless because the crisis outgrew the metrics. The people on the streets aren't just the chronically unhoused anymore. They're waitresses, Uber drivers, hotel workers, veterans who ran out of luck, seniors living on fixed incomes that haven't been fixed in decades, young people who moved to LA for opportunity and found that even opportunity has an entry fee they couldn't afford. And as the population changed, so did the geography. The crisis isn't confined to Skid Row. Skid Row is just the symbol. The real collapse is happening everywhere else. Encampments rise overnight like emergency cities. Sidewalks transform into corridors of survival. Storefronts lock their bathrooms. Parks become temporary villages. Whole blocks take on a surreal stillness. People living, sleeping, cooking, struggling right beside the glow of luxury towers that symbolize everything they can't reach. LA's government keeps announcing plans, bold, expensive plans, but the crisis grows faster than the solutions. Every new shelter fills immediately. Every tiny home village becomes a waiting list. Every funding package disappears into a maze of departments and agencies and middlemen that drain momentum before a single tent comes down. And the recession has only made the fuse burn faster. People are falling into homelessness quicker than the city can pull them out. Rents rise, groceries rise, utilities rise, wages barely move. It takes one crisis, one car repair, one medical bill, one lost job to push a family past the edge. Los Angeles isn't failing because people are lazy or because services don't exist. It's failing because the math stopped working. Too many people, too few homes, too much bureaucracy, too little time. The city that spent decades selling dreams is now drowning in its own reality. A crisis so widespread, so visible, so inescapable that even the billboards and studio lights can't distract from what's happening on the ground. Los Angeles didn't run out of compassion, it ran out of places to hide the truth. 2. Phoenix, heat, inflation, and the breaking point of the Southwest. Phoenix wasn't supposed to collapse. It was the desert miracle. The place where endless suburbs bloomed out of sand, where optimism stretched wider than the horizon, where newcomers arrived with the same enthusiasm as developers who believed the boom would never end. For decades, Phoenix thrived on the idea that expansion alone could solve every problem, but expansion can hide a crisis only until the heat exposes everything. And in Phoenix, the heat always wins. The homeless crisis didn't creep into this city, it detonated. First quietly, then visibly, then unmistakably, until entire blocks transformed into tent cities that seem to grow in the time it takes the sun to set. The same heat that draws people to Arizona in the winter becomes a death sentence in the summer. Every year, bodies are found on sidewalks, in alleys, in dry washes. People who simply couldn't outrun temperatures that climb past 110 and refuse to fall even after midnight. The weather is only part of the story. The real collapse came from the economy warping under its own pressure. Phoenix's housing market exploded faster than almost anywhere else in the country. Homes that cost $180,000 a decade ago now sell for $500,000. Rent doubled, then doubled again. Landlords raised prices because they could, because demand was infinite, because Californians arrived with cash in hand, because investors bought homes in bulk and turned neighborhoods into short-term rentals that drained the supply dry. For working families, the math snapped. A teacher can't afford Phoenix anymore. Neither can a construction worker, a line cook, a retail worker, or a single parent with 2 kids. People who built the city can no longer live in it, and when they fall hard. There are no basements to sleep in, no cool nights, no safety net strong enough to keep people off the streets when the bills pile up. Then came the inflation wave. Food up, gas up, utilities up, everything rising together until paycheck to paycheck households had nothing left to cut. One missed week of income, one medical emergency, one broken down car, and people found themselves stepping into the furnace of outdoor survival. Phoenix tried to respond, but every attempt was outpaced by the speed of the collapse. Shelters filled, cooling centers overflowed, hotels converted to temporary housing, then filled again. Police cleared one encampment and 3 more appeared overnight. The recession is accelerating everything. People are arriving faster than Phoenix can help them, and falling faster than the city can catch them. Desperation now writes itself across miles of tents, long corridors of tarp, shopping carts, makeshift structures, and people doing everything they can to stay alive in a climate that kills without hesitation. This isn't just a homeless crisis, it's a climate crisis, a housing crisis, and an economic crisis folded into one, all hitting the same city at the same time. Phoenix didn't fail because people stopped caring. It failed because the system wasn't built for the pressures of the modern world. For heat like this, for prices like these, for a recession that strips people down to survival mode. The desert once symbolized endless possibility. Now it's a warning. Some places break faster, louder, and hotter than others. 3. Portland, when idealism meets an unpayable bill. Portland's collapse didn't begin with crime waves or protests or headlines. It began with a promise the city genuinely tried to keep. Portland wanted to be different, softer, kinder, a refuge for artists, dreamers, activists, workers, the displaced, the misunderstood, a city where compassion wasn't a slogan but a blueprint. A place where no one would be left behind, but compassion without capacity eventually breaks, and Portland has finally reached the point where the bill for its ideals is coming due. And it's a bill the city can no longer afford to pay. The homeless crisis here didn't appear suddenly. It seeped into the city like the damp Pacific air, gathering quietly in corners people ignored, until those corners spread into streets, then blocks, then entire districts. What began as scattered tents became rows, and what became rows turned into entire outdoor neighborhoods, clusters of suffering that grew faster than the city's ability to respond. Portland built programs, Portland built outreach, Portland built hope, but hope collapses under math. Housing costs shot up, then exploded. Wages stagnated. Inflation squeezed every inch of the city. Evictions surged quietly at first, then loudly, and the mental health infrastructure, already held together with duct tape and optimism, tore down the middle. The recession only made everything happen faster, sharper, more brutally. People who were once one crisis away from homelessness now found themselves one paycheck away, then no paychecks away. And once they fell, climbing back up became nearly impossible. Portland's overcrowded shelters became triage centers. Its waiting lists stretched into absurdity. Entire motels filled with families who had nowhere else to go. And all the while, the tents kept spreading on sidewalks, along highways, around schools, near apartment complexes, in parks where children used to play. The city tried sweeps, brief, temporary, symbolic. But you can't sweep away a crisis that grows faster than your solutions. Every tent removed simply reappeared 2 blocks away, like the homelessness had roots and Portland was the soil. Then came the second wave, the people who were never homeless before. Bartenders, teachers' aides, graduate students, delivery drivers, young families trying to outrun rent increases that doubled in 3 years. Portland's dream, the dream of a city that could hold everyone, collided with the reality of a city that couldn't even hold itself. Businesses fled downtown, commuters avoided it. Blocks that once smelled like espresso and bookstores now smelled like campfires and despair. The vibrant weirdness that defined the city slowly dulled into exhaustion. Portland didn't collapse because it cared too little. It collapsed because it cared so much and built a system that couldn't sustain the weight of that compassion during a recession that punished every weakness, every delay, every idealistic hope that resources would eventually match demand. They never did, and now Portland faces a crisis too complex for quick fixes. A crisis born not of cruelty, but of strain, not of neglect, but of overload. A crisis where the city's greatest strength, its heart, became the very thing that made the fall harder. The homeless crisis in Portland isn't a failure of values, it's a failure of capacity, a moment where idealism meets mathematics, and the math wins for Philadelphia, the East Coast meltdown. No one wants to admit. Philadelphia has always carried a certain toughness, the kind carved into brick row houses, the kind echoed through old factory blocks and corner delis, the kind you feel in the grit of its sidewalks and the pride of its neighborhoods. This is a city that has survived everything: industrial collapse, political chaos, budget crises, crime, poverty, and wave after wave of people leaving for easier lives somewhere else. But the homeless crisis spreading through Philadelphia is different. This time, the city isn't absorbing the blow, it's cracking under it. Walk through Kensington and you see a version of America most leaders pretend doesn't exist. Streets that feel like open-air triage, crowds of people moving like shadows, slow and tired, carrying the weight of addiction, poverty, trauma, and a system that gave up on them long before they gave up on themselves. What started as isolated pockets of suffering has become an entire district defined by collapse. But Kensington is only the loudest warning. The quieter ones stretch across the city like stress fractures. Encampments rising along the SEPTA lines, tents tucked beneath bridges, makeshift shelters assembled in the alleys between row homes built a century ago, families sleeping in cars parked outside hospitals, seniors wrapped in blankets on benches near City Hall. The crisis didn't explode here. It seeped in through every gap the economy left behind. After the pandemic, rents skyrocketed. Inflation dragged groceries and utilities up with them. Wages didn't move. And thousands of Philadelphians, people who worked, people who tried, people who pushed through every setback, suddenly found themselves standing at the edge with nowhere left to go. The recession doesn't strike Philadelphia the way it strikes the coasts or the Sun Belt. Here it arrives through subtraction, a job cut, a landlord raising rent, a heating bill doubling in January, a parent who can't afford their medication anymore, one subtraction at a time until the margin evaporates and the fall begins. The city's safety net is overwhelmed. Shelters operate at capacity year-round. Treatment centers are booked months out. Affordable housing projects move at the speed of paperwork, work, while the crisis spreads at the speed of desperation. Outreach workers do their best, but best is no match for a tidal wave. Philadelphia's layout makes the crisis impossible to hide. Narrow streets, dense neighborhoods, public transit that touches every corner of the city. When homelessness spreads here, it spreads visibly. It embeds itself into the rhythm of daily life. The morning commute, the grocery run, the walk to school. And yet, national attention rarely lingers on Philadelphia, maybe because the city doesn't collapse with spectacle. It collapses quietly, steadily, a slow fade rather than a sudden break. That's what makes the crisis here so haunting. There's no singular disaster, no single trigger, just the slow erosion of a city that once promised opportunity and now can barely offer shelter. Philadelphia didn't fail because of one policy or one administration. It failed because poverty stacked up decade after decade until the recession pushed the entire system past its limit. The East Coast likes to pretend New York and DC define the region, but if you want to see the future city's fear, the breaking point where housing, addiction, inflation, and stagnation collide, Philadelphia is the place to look. A city fighting a war it didn't start, against forces it can't control, with resources that run out faster than hope can refill them. The homeless crisis spreading across America isn't a storm that came out of nowhere. It's the final symptom of everything the country ignored for too long. Decades of rising costs, stagnant wages, shrinking safety nets, and cities stretched so thin they're starting to tear. Los Angeles, Phoenix, Portland, Philadelphia. These places aren't outliers, they're warnings, early chapters in a story the rest of the nation is trying desperately not to read. Because homelessness isn't about tents, or addiction, or crime. Those are just the visible layers, the surface symptoms of a deeper rot. Beneath every collapsed block is the same truth. People didn't fall through the cracks, the floor gave out beneath them, Cities built for another era are trying to shoulder a crisis they were never designed to handle. Rents soared, inflation suffocated, services buckled, and the recession tightened every financial ligament until the cities already under strain finally snapped. In Los Angeles, the streets filled because the dream became unaffordable. In Phoenix, people died because the heat became unlivable. In Portland, ideals collided with arithmetic. In Philadelphia, the dam broke in silence long before the country noticed. This collapse isn't loud, it isn't fast, it isn't cinematic, it's slow motion, it's structural, it's everywhere. And the scariest part? These four cities aren't the worst hit. They're just the first ones to reach a point where the crisis can no longer be pushed out of sight. Behind them are dozens more, waiting, cracking, unraveling. If homelessness continues rising at the pace it is now, the crisis will not stay in the shadows. It will redefine American cities, rewrite their budgets, reshape their communities, and force a reckoning the country has postponed for far too long. Because homelessness isn't a city problem, it's an economic one, a national one, a sign that the foundation is buckling, and the collapse has already begun. And if the nation doesn't face the truth soon, these four cities won't be remembered as warnings, they'll be remembered as the beginning.